Welcome back to Her True Stories, where we share real accounts of women who refused to be victims and chose to be victors instead. I'm your host, and today we have a story that will absolutely blow your mind. Before we dive into Victoria's incredible journey of strategic revenge, I want you to know that this story contains mature themes of family betrayal, corporate crime, and calculated justice. If you're sensitive to intense emotional content, please consider whether this is the right story for you today. But if you're ready to hear about a 62-year-old woman who turned public humiliation into private victory, who transformed one moment of cruelty into a masterclass in consequences, then settle in. Because what Victoria Hale did to the family who called her a disgusting embarrassment at her son's wedding will restore your faith in justice. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because stories like this are exactly why this channel exists. To show you that it's never too late to fight back, and some people should never be underestimated. Now, let's meet Victoria Hale and learn what happens when entitled people pick a fight with the wrong woman. My name is Victoria Hale, and I am 62 years old. I have built two empires, one in oil, one in luxury jewelry, and I have never forgotten a slight. Especially not the one that happened at my son's wedding, when champagne bubbled like laughter and cameras flashed like lightning strikes. The receiving line moved with practiced elegance through the ballroom of the Four Seasons. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across Italian marble floors, and the scent of white orchids mixed with expensive perfume. I wore my signature strand of South Sea pearls and a midnight blue Armani that cost more than most people's cars. My silver hair was swept into a perfect chignon, and my diamond bracelet caught the light with each graceful movement. I was proud that evening. My son Ethan looked handsome in his bespoke tuxedo, and despite my reservations about his choice of bride, I had hoped we could find common ground in our shared love for him. I was wrong. Savannah Reed, now Savannah Hale, stood beside Ethan in her $10,000 gown, her smile bright as stage lights and twice as artificial. Her parents flanked her like bookends. Martin Reed, a stocky man with soft hands and expensive shoes, and Colette Reed, whose jewelry screamed new money and whose eyes held the calculating gleam of someone always measuring social advantage. When my turn came in the receiving line, I extended my hand with the same grace I'd shown to oil ministers and heads of state. Congratulations, Savannah. You look lovely. Savannah took my hand, her grip deliberately too firm, her nails digging slightly into my skin. She turned to her parents with a smile that never reached her eyes. Mom, Dad, this is the disgusting family embarrassment we have to deal with. The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Martin Reed's laugh was immediate and eager, the sound of a man desperate to please his daughter. Colette's laughter followed, higher-pitched, performative, designed for the phones I could see recording in my peripheral vision. They laughed at me, at 62, in my Armani and pearls. The woman who had clawed her way from a Texas oil field to boardrooms that reeked of leather and contempt. The woman who spoke fluent crude oil futures and Mandarin and the language of men who thought I couldn't count zeros. I stood perfectly still, my smile never wavering, my hand still extended in greeting. Because I had learned long ago that silence is not submission, silence is storage. Martin Reed's laughter died first. His eyes focused on my face, really looked at me for the first time, and I watched recognition dawn like a terrible sunrise. Ma'am, he said, his voice suddenly thick with something between fear and disbelief. Are you the secret billionaire who bought my company? The question hit the receiving line like a shockwave. Conversation stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the quartet in the corner seemed to miss a note. I sipped my water, never alcohol at business functions, even disguised ones, and met his gaze with the same steady look I'd given to senators and CEOs who thought they could intimidate me. Congratulations on your daughter's marriage, Mr. Reed, I said, my voice carrying the exact temperature of a legal document, just the quiet before demolition. Around us, I cataloged the damage in real time. Phones were recording. Savannah's face had gone the color of her white roses. Colette's laugh had transformed into a choking sound. The wedding photographer, thinking this was a touching family moment, captured Martin's expression of dawning horror with professional precision. And Ethan, my son, my only child, the boy I had raised with every advantage money and love could provide, Ethan looked away, chose the safer path, pretended not to hear his wife's public humiliation of his mother. That was my answer. That was everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay. My phone buzzed against my evening bag. The text was from James Morrison, my lead counsel. Closing complete. Congratulations, Ms. Hale. You are now the majority owner and executive chair of Reed Footwear Works. The acquisition had been months in the making. Martin Reed's legacy shoemaking company had been hemorrhaging money for years, cutting corners on quality, underpaying workers, letting environmental standards slide. I didn't rescue rot. I harvested it. I had spent 3 months circling Reed Footwear like a patient shark, buying up their debt at discount, sending consultants in as marketing photographers who photographed their books instead of their boots. Martin Reed had been so focused on his daughter's engagement to my son that he'd never noticed his company being quietly devoured. This morning, while he was adjusting his bow tie and I was having my hair styled, the final papers had been signed. Reed Footwear Works was now mine, along with its debt, its employees, its reputation, and its future. Martin Reed owned a company that no longer existed. His name was about to disappear from business directories. His employees were about to discover that their new boss was the woman his daughter had just called a disgusting family embarrassment in front of 300 wedding guests and at least 50 recording devices. I smiled for the photographer, a genuine smile this time. Thank you for the warm welcome to the family, I said to the Reeds, my voice carrying across the ballroom with crystalline clarity. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other. The receiving line resumed, but the damage was done. Whispers spread through the crowd like ripples in disturbed water. Phones were buzzing with texts and social media posts. The society photographer who specialized in weddings was already mentally composing the caption that would run in tomorrow's paper. As the evening progressed, I danced with appropriate partners, complimented the flowers, and smiled at all the right moments. But inside, I was already planning, calculating, measuring the distance between insult and annihilation. They had wanted a spectacle. They would get a season. That night, alone in my penthouse overlooking the city, I changed from my evening gown into silk pajamas and poured myself a single glass of 30-year-old scotch. I stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the lights that stretched to the horizon, some of them powered by oil I had pulled from the earth, some of them illuminating buildings where people wore jewelry I had designed. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. To the disgusting family embarrassment, I said aloud, may she teach you the difference between wealth and power. Tomorrow, the real wedding would begin. Not the ceremony that had ended in rice and laughter, but the marriage between the Reed family and the consequences of underestimating me. I had built empires from nothing. Destroying one small family's comfortable life would be remarkably simple. They thought they were laughing at a harmless old woman. They had no idea they were laughing at a demolition expert who had just lit the fuse. The scotch tasted like victory, and victory tasted like the beginning of the end. Before we continue with Victoria's story, I want to address something that might resonate with many of you watching. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. This story is about to get incredibly intense. Victoria Hale is about to show the Reed family exactly what happens when you mistake elegance for weakness. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what she does next will leave you absolutely speechless. Sunday morning brought coffee black as crude oil and newspapers that still smelled of ink and ambition. I sat in my home office, a glass-walled sanctuary 30 floors above the city, and reviewed my empire with the methodical precision of a general surveying her territories. Helios Dominion Energy, market cap $47 billion. Proven reserves across 3 continents. A company I had built from a single struggling rig in West Texas, back when oil was $13 a barrel and boardrooms smelled of cigars and condescension. Hale Atelier, luxury jewelry and accessories with flagship stores in New York, Paris, London, and Tokyo. Each piece handcrafted, each design bearing my signature, a small, elegant beach that had become synonymous with power worn beautifully. The Reed Footwear Works acquisition was a footnote in my portfolio, barely registering as a rounding error in my quarterly reports. But footnotes, I had learned, could topple governments if placed correctly. My assistant knocked and entered with a secure tablet. The Retransition team is standing by, Ms. Hale. Legal has prepared the morning briefings. Thank you, Patricia. Have them hold for 10 minutes. I want to review yesterday's festivities. The wedding footage was already compiled and cataloged by my media team. I watched Savannah's insult on repeat, studying the angles, the lighting, the expressions of the other guests. Martin Reed's horrified recognition. Colette's nervous laughter dying in her throat. And Ethan, my son, looking away at the exact moment his mother needed his support. I had raised Ethan in glass towers and rare air. Private schools where tuition cost more than most people's salaries. Summers in the Hamptons and winters in Aspen. I gave him every advantage, every opportunity, every privilege that money and influence could provide. What I couldn't give him was a backbone. He preferred applause to authenticity, and Savannah Reed had recognized that weakness before I did. She had seen my son as a ladder to elevation, a way to climb from her family's provincial success to real power. What she hadn't anticipated was that power already had a guardian, and that guardian didn't approve of social climbers who mistook cruelty for sophistication. The Reed family's history was an open book to anyone who cared to read it. Martin Reed had inherited Reed Footwear Works from his father, who had built it from nothing in the 1940s. 3 generations of quality craftsmanship, reduced under Martin's leadership to cost-cutting measures and corner-cutting that compromised both product integrity and worker safety. I had been circling Reed Footwear for 18 months, not out of malice, but out of business sense. The company had good bones, excellent facilities, skilled workers, a brand name that still carried weight with consumers who remembered when American-made meant something. What it lacked was leadership that understood the difference between profit and plunder. Martin Reed had been systematically destroying his own inheritance. Late payments to suppliers, deferred maintenance on equipment, environmental violations that would have shut down the tannery if the right inspector had shown up on the wrong day. Most damning of all, he had been underpaying his workers while expanding his personal fleet of company vehicles. I didn't rescue failing companies. I acquired assets and rebuilt them properly. The blind trust one had used for the acquisition was so legally complex that even sophisticated investors would need forensic accountants to trace the ownership back to me. Martin Reed, focused on wedding planning and his daughter's social aspirations, had never bothered to investigate who was buying his debt. That had been his first mistake. The second was raising a daughter who thought insults were inherited jewelry. My phone rang. Ethan's number. I let it ring twice before answering. Good morning, son. Mom, we need to talk. His voice carried the petulant edge I remembered from his teenage years, when consequences were foreign concepts and apologies were currencies he rarely needed to spend.
I'm listening.
Savannah is upset about last night. She says you embarrassed her family at the reception. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. I see. And what do you think happened last night, Ethan? Silence. The kind of silence that children use when they know the truth, but hope their parents will accept a more convenient version of events. Look, Mom, Savannah was nervous. She didn't mean whatever you think she said. Maybe you misheard. I have the video, Ethan. Multiple angles. Professional quality. Your wife called me a disgusting family embarrassment to her parents, who laughed. On camera. At my expense. At our family's expense. She was joking.
No.
The word landed like a gavel. She was not joking. She was establishing hierarchy, making it clear that I was to be tolerated, not respected, setting the tone for how your new family would treat your old one. Another silence, longer this time. I could hear him breathing, could almost see him trying to find a path that didn't require choosing sides. What do you want me to do, Mom? Divorce her? We just got married yesterday. I want you to be the man I raised you to be. I want you to protect the family that gave you everything, not abandon it for people who show their character by insulting elders at wedding receptions. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, Ethan. Complexity is what people claim when they don't want to make difficult choices. Your wife insulted me publicly. Your new in-laws laughed. You did nothing. That simplifies things considerably. I hung up before he could respond and walked to my window wall. The city spread below me like a circuit board, all connections and power grids and carefully managed energy flows. I had learned to read cities the way other people read books. Infrastructure as narrative, money as character development, power as the only plot that mattered. Patricia knocked again. The transition team is ready, Ms. Hale. Legal says the Reed building is secure, and HR has prepared the all-hands announcement. Thank you. One more call first. I dialed James Morrison, my lead attorney, the man who had engineered the Reed acquisition with surgical precision. James, excellent work on the closing. I want you to prepare the 30-day transition plan we discussed. Full implementation, no exceptions. Of course, Victoria. The Reed family is going to be surprised. James, I didn't build 2 Fortune 500 companies by worrying about other people's feelings. The Reed family chose to make this personal at my son's wedding. I'm simply responding in kind. Understood. The new signage is ready for installation, the security protocols are in place, and the staff transition documents are prepared. We can begin tomorrow morning. Perfect. And James? I want this done cleanly.
No drama, no theatrics.
Just business. Cold, legal, unstoppable business. That's what we do best, Victoria. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began reviewing the Reed footwear personnel files. 43 employees, most of whom had been with the company for over a decade. Good people doing skilled work for an owner who treated them like overhead expenses rather than human assets. That would change immediately. By tomorrow night, Martin Reed would discover that his family business was no longer his business. His employees would learn that their new owner was the woman his daughter had insulted at her wedding. The local media would begin asking questions about environmental violations and worker safety issues that had been ignored for years. And Savannah, beautiful, cruel Savannah who thought insults were accessories, would discover that some jewelry comes with sharp edges that draw blood from the careless. I closed the laptop and finished my coffee. The transition team would handle the mechanical aspects of the takeover. My role was simpler. I would demonstrate the difference between being embarrassing and being embarrassed. One was a choice. The other was a consequence. By the time I was finished, the Reed family would understand both intimately. Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. The Reed Footwear Works building stood against the dawn sky like a monument to faded glory, red brick weathered by decades of New England winters, windows that needed cleaning, and a parking lot where puddles reflected the gray clouds overhead. I arrived in my black Mercedes, followed by a convoy of legal and transition specialists in equally discreet vehicles, just business arriving to collect what it owned. The first sign of change was the security system. Martin Reed's access card turned red at 7:01 a.m., along with those of his wife and daughter. The automated message was polite but absolute. Access denied. Please contact Human Resources. By 7:15, my transition team had secured the building. By 7:30, the staff began arriving to find new faces at the reception desk and unfamiliar cars in the executive parking spaces. I walked through the factory floor first before I claimed the corner office, before I met with management, before I did anything that looked like conquest. I shook hands with every worker I could find, spoke to them by name when Patricia handed me the personnel files, and asked about their families, their concerns, their ideas for improving operations. Mrs. Patterson, I said to a woman who had been running the leather cutting station for 15 years, I understand you've suggested some equipment upgrades that weren't approved. She looked surprised that I knew her name, more surprised that I knew about her suggestions. Yes, ma'am. The cutting table hydraulics are from 1987. We could increase precision and reduce waste with newer equipment. Considered approved. Have your supervisor send the specifications to my office today. Word spread through the factory floor faster than gossip at a church social. The new owner, whoever she was, knew their names, cared about their ideas, and had just approved equipment upgrades that Martin Reed had been ignoring for 3 years. By the time I reached the executive offices, a small crowd of workers had gathered to watch. Not hostile, not celebrating, just curious about the woman in the pearl necklace and Italian suit who spoke to them like colleagues rather than expenses. Martin Reed arrived at 8:47 a.m., his face flushed from running through the parking lot, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He burst through the main entrance like a man whose house was on fire, which in a sense it was. What the hell is going on here? He demanded of the security guard, formerly his security guard, now mine.
I'm Martin Reed.
I own this company. The guard, professionally trained and legally briefed, offered him a chair and a bottle of water. I'm sorry, sir, but you'll need to speak with Human Resources about building access. Ms. Hale is conducting a transition meeting with department heads. Ms. Hale? Who the hell is Ms. Hale? I emerged from the conference room at that exact moment, having timed my appearance with the precision of a theater director. Martin Reed's eyes found mine across the lobby, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally, dawning horror. Good morning, Martin, I said, my voice carrying the professional warmth of a new business partner. I was hoping we could have a conversation about the transition. Transition? What transition? This is my company. No, I said, pulling a leather folder from my briefcase with deliberate care. This is my company. As of Friday afternoon, the acquisition of Reed Footwear Works was completed through Hale Holdings. You are now founder emeritus with no operational authority. Your office has been cleared, your access revoked, and your company vehicle is being repossessed as we speak. The lobby had gone completely silent. Workers who had arrived for the morning shift stood frozen, watching their former owner learn that he was now former in every sense of the word. Martin's face went through several interesting color changes. You can't do this. I have lawyers. I have contracts. You had debt, Martin. Substantial debt that you personally guaranteed when you restructured the company loans 2 years ago. I bought that debt. All of it, including the accelerated payment clauses that triggered when your environmental violations were reported to the state. I smiled with the warmth of an Arctic winter, which happened this morning. Environmental violations? What environmental violations? The tannery discharge issues that you've been ignoring. The worker safety violations that OSHA will be very interested in reviewing. The wage and hour discrepancies that the Department of Labor will want to audit. I closed the folder with a soft snap. All reported, all documented, all with your signature on the cover-up attempts. Patricia appeared at my elbow with a tablet. Ms. Hale, the staff meeting is ready to begin. Thank you. I looked back at Martin, who was swaying slightly as if the floor had shifted beneath his feet. Martin, you're welcome to attend the all-hands meeting where I'll be introducing myself to your former employees. I think they'll be very interested in meeting their new owner. The conference room was packed. 43 employees, from machine operators to office staff, all crowded around the long table where Martin Reed used to hold his monthly meetings about cost-cutting and efficiency improvements. I stood at the head of the table, my hands folded, my pearl necklace catching the light from the windows that overlooked the factory floor. Good morning. My name is Victoria Hale, and as of this morning, I am the owner and executive chair of this company. I want to address 3 things immediately. I paused, making eye contact with as many faces as possible. First, your jobs are safe. In fact, I'm announcing an immediate cost of living adjustment for all hourly employees, funded by eliminating unnecessary executive expenses. A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Second, we will be investing in equipment upgrades, safety improvements, and environmental compliance measures that should have been implemented years ago. The murmurs grew louder, more positive. Third, this company will return to the quality standards and worker respect that built its reputation in the first place. A hand raised in the back. Joe Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the stitching department. Ms. Hale, what about Mr. Reed? I looked through the glass wall of the conference room to where Martin Reed stood in the lobby, still holding the bottle of water, still looking like a man who had woken up in someone else's life. Mr. Reed is no longer with the company in any operational capacity. I'm sure he'll find other opportunities to pursue. I turned back to the room. Any other questions? The meeting lasted 30 minutes. When it ended, the employees filed out with something I hadn't seen in their faces when I arrived. Hope. Martin Reed was waiting for me in the lobby, flanked by what appeared to be a hastily assembled legal team. 2 men in suits that didn't quite fit and a woman with the harried look of someone who had been pulled away from her regular Monday morning. Ms. Hale, one of the attorneys said, I'm David Walsh, representing Mr. Reed. We need to discuss this situation. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Walsh. The acquisition was completed legally, with all proper notifications and regulatory approvals. Mr. Reed's personal guarantees were clearly spelled out in his loan documents, which he signed. The environmental and safety violations are documented and date-stamped. This is business, not personal. But surely some accommodation can be reached. No accommodation is necessary. Mr. Reed is free to pursue other business ventures. However, his relationship with this company ended when I purchased it. I looked directly at Martin Reed. I hope you enjoyed the wedding, Martin. Congratulations again on your daughter's marriage. I walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing in the lobby of what had been his company 12 hours earlier, surrounded by lawyers who were about to explain exactly how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. That afternoon, I called a press conference. Nothing theatrical, just a simple announcement in the factory conference room with local business reporters and a few photographers. Reed Footwear Works has been acquired by Hale Holdings, I announced, reading from a prepared statement. We are committed to maintaining the company's tradition of American-made quality while implementing modern safety and environmental standards. The entire workforce will be retained, with immediate improvements to wages and working conditions. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Hale, can you comment on the circumstances of the acquisition? We understand it happened quite suddenly. Business acquisitions are typically confidential until they're completed. The Reed family was aware of our interest in the company. Technically true, though they had been unaware that their anonymous debt buyer was the woman they had insulted 2 days earlier. Another reporter. What are your plans for the Reed family's involvement in the company going forward? I smiled with the warmth of polished marble. The Reed family will have the same opportunities as any other potential investors to participate in future business ventures. Of course, that would require capital, which they currently lack. The press conference lasted 20 minutes. By evening, the local business news was running the story under headlines like "Local Footwear Company Changes Hands" and "New Owner Promises Worker Improvements." What they couldn't report, because they didn't know, was that the new owner was the woman who had been publicly humiliated by the seller's family just 48 hours earlier. That information would come out eventually. But I wanted the business story to be established first, the narrative of a responsible acquisition by someone committed to worker welfare and quality manufacturing. When the personal story emerged, it would be a subplot, not the main event. That evening, alone in my penthouse, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my windows, looking out at the city lights. My phone had been buzzing all day, messages from Ethan that I hadn't answered, calls from Martin Reed that I had blocked, emails from reporters that Patricia had fielded. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Martin Reed would undoubtedly try to find lawyers willing to fight the acquisition. Savannah would probably attempt some form of social media campaign to portray herself as the victim of a vindictive mother-in-law. Ethan would be caught in the middle, forced to choose between his mother and his new wife's family. But tonight, I had won the first battle in a war they didn't even know they were fighting. Reed Footwear Works was mine. Its 43 employees were now my responsibility. Its future was in my hands instead of Martin Reed's increasingly desperate ones. I raised my wine glass to my reflection in the window. Day 1 complete, I said aloud. Welcome to the consequences of underestimating me. The city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere out there, the Reed family was learning that embarrassment was not just an adjective, it was a destination. Tuesday morning brought rain that drummed against my office windows like impatient fingers. I sat behind my new desk at Reed Footwear, Martin's former desk, cleared of his personal effects and sanitized of his poor decisions, reviewing the forensic audit results that had arrived overnight. The news was worse than I had expected, and I had expected it to be bad. James Morrison, my lead attorney, sat across from me with 3 thick binders of evidence. Victoria, we've found systematic irregularities going back for years. Vendor kickbacks, environmental violation cover-ups, and what appears to be a deliberate scheme to avoid paying workers overtime. Show me the worst first. He opened the red binder. A slush fund coded as leather treatments that was actually being used for Martin Reed's political donations. Technically legal, but ethically questionable. More concerning is this. He slid a spreadsheet across the desk. Colette Reed's charitable foundation received vendor kickbacks disguised as donations. That's fraud. I studied the numbers with the same intensity one once used to read geological surveys. The Reed family hadn't just been cutting corners, they had been systematically looting their own company while their employees worked for wages that hadn't increased in 3 years. What about the environmental issues? Tannery discharge violations dating back 18 months. OSHA safety violations that were deliberately concealed. Worker injury reports that were altered to avoid regulatory scrutiny. James's expression was grim. Martin Reed wasn't just a bad businessman, Victoria. He was a criminal who got lucky for too long. I closed the binder with deliberate care. File for a voluntary audit with all relevant agencies. Full transparency. Complete cooperation. That will destroy any remaining value in the Reed name. Good. The Reed name is a liability now. We're not in the business of protecting reputations that deserve to be ruined. By 10 a.m., I had called a meeting with the local union representative. Tommy Castellano was a man in his 50s who looked like he had spent 40 years fighting fights that were barely worth winning. He sat across from me in the conference room, his weathered hands folded, his eyes skeptical. Mr. Castellano, I've reviewed the wage and benefit situation. I want to propose an immediate 15% across-the-board increase for all union members, plus retroactive overtime pay for hours that were incorrectly classified over the past 2 years. His eyebrows rose slightly. What's the catch?
No catch.
This is what should have been happening all along. I'm also canceling Martin Reed's consulting contract and selling his fleet of company vehicles. The proceeds will fund a health insurance upgrade and a safety equipment modernization program. Tommy leaned back in his chair. Lady, I've been dealing with management for 30 years. Nobody gives away money without wanting something back. I'm not giving away money, Mr. Castellano. I'm investing in the people who actually make this company valuable. Martin Reed saw employees as expenses. I see them as assets that appreciate when they're treated properly. What do you want from us? Quality work, honest communication, and partnership in making this company profitable for everyone, workers, management, and ownership. The same thing you've been asking for and not getting. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. You're the woman from the wedding, aren't you? The one Savannah Reed called names. I am. And now you own her daddy's company. I do. Tommy smiled for the first time since entering the room. Hell, lady. That's the best revenge story I've heard since my divorce. The union vote was unanimous. By noon, news of the wage increases and benefit improvements had spread through the factory like wildfire. By 1 p.m., local media was reporting on the dramatic worker-friendly changes at the newly acquired Reed Footwear Works. By 2 p.m., my phone was ringing with a call I had been expecting. Ms. Hale, this is Colette Reed. I think we need to talk. Good afternoon, Mrs. Reed. What can I do for you? You can stop this vindictive attack on my family. Her voice carried the shrill edge of someone who had never been held accountable for anything. Martin is devastated. Savannah is getting hate messages on social media. This has gone too far. I'm not sure what attack you're referring to, Mrs. Reed. I purchased a failing company and implemented immediate improvements to working conditions and environmental compliance. That's called business. Don't play dumb with me. You're doing this because of what happened at the wedding. Because you couldn't take a joke. I set down my pen with deliberate precision. Mrs. Reed, I want to be very clear about something. Your daughter publicly humiliated me at her wedding reception. Your husband left. You left. You made a choice to treat me with contempt in front of 300 witnesses. It was a choice. And choices have consequences. The consequence of treating me like an embarrassment is that you now get to experience actual embarrassment. The kind that comes with federal audits and newspaper headlines and workers who discover how badly you've been cheating them. You can't do this to us. We'll fight you. With what money, Mrs. Reed? Your husband's company is gone. The environmental fines will consume whatever savings you have. The civil lawsuits from workers who were cheated out of overtime pay will finish whatever's left. And your charitable foundation? The one that received vendor kickbacks? That's going to be very interesting to explain to the IRS. Silence on the line. Then, how do you know about? I know about everything, Mrs. Reed. I know about the political slush fund, the safety violations, the altered injury reports, and the kickback scheme. I know because I own the company now, which means I own all the records your husband thought he could hide forever. What do you want? I want you to understand that some people fight back when you try to humiliate them. I want you to learn that wealth without wisdom is just money waiting to be lost. And I want you to remember that the next time you think about laughing at someone who's smarter, tougher, and considerably more dangerous than you realized. I hung up before she could respond. Wednesday morning brought the press conference I had been preparing for since the acquisition closed. Not in my office this time, but in the factory floor, surrounded by workers and equipment and the smell of honest labor. I stood before the assembled reporters wearing my signature pearls and a navy blue suit that cost more than Martin Reed's monthly salary. Behind me, the employees who had been cheated for years stood in their work clothes, their faces no longer carrying the defeated expressions I had seen on Monday morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I called this press conference to address the irregularities we discovered during our transition audit of Reed Footwear Works. I held up a thick folder. These documents detail systematic violations of environmental regulations, worker safety standards, and wage and hour laws stretching back for years. The cameras flashed like lightning. The reporters leaned forward, sensing the story was bigger than a simple business acquisition. All violations have been reported to the appropriate regulatory agencies. We are cooperating fully with all investigations. We have also initiated civil proceedings to recover overtime pay that was illegally withheld from our employees. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Hale, can you comment on the timing of these discoveries? Some people are suggesting this is retaliation for personal issues with the Reed family. I met her gaze directly. The timing is simple. We discovered these violations as soon as we gained access to the company's records. The Reed family's personal conduct at my son's wedding reception is irrelevant to federal environmental law and worker safety regulations. Another reporter jumped in. What about suggestions that this acquisition was motivated by revenge? I don't make billion-dollar business decisions based on personal feelings. I make them based on opportunity, value, and potential return on investment. Reed Footwear Works was a profitable company being run into the ground by incompetent leadership. That's a business problem with a business solution. I don't make billion-dollar business decisions based on personal feelings. I make them based on opportunity, value, and potential return on investment. Reed Footwear Works was a profitable company being run into the ground by incompetent leadership. That's a business problem with a business solution. But you were reportedly insulted by the Reed family at the wedding. I held up one hand, and the room fell silent. Let me be very clear about something. I am Victoria Hale. I am the executive chair of Helios Dominion Energy and the founder of Hale Atelier. I have built 2 Fortune 500 companies from nothing. I negotiate with oil ministers and heads of state. I do not need revenge against people who were never in my league to begin with. The room was absolutely silent. Even the factory equipment seemed to have stopped humming. What I do need is for this company to operate legally, ethically, and profitably. What I do need is for workers to be paid fairly and treated safely. What I do need is for environmental regulations to be followed. I smiled with the warmth of polished steel. If that happens to embarrass people who profited from illegal practices, that's a bonus, not a motivation. The press conference lasted 30 minutes. By evening, every local news station was running the story. Hale Industries CEO exposes widespread violations at acquired company. Workers to receive back pay after new owner discovers wage theft. Environmental cleanup ordered at local manufacturing facility. The narrative was set exactly as I had planned it. Victoria Hale as the responsible business owner cleaning up years of neglect and illegal practices by the previous management. The wedding insult was mentioned in passing, a footnote to the larger story of corporate responsibility and worker protection. Thursday brought the first of what would be many legal filings. Federal environmental regulators announced a formal investigation. The Department of Labor opened an audit of wage and hour practices. The State Attorney General's office began reviewing the charitable foundation kickback scheme. Each announcement was accompanied by the same photograph, me standing in the Reed Footwear factory, surrounded by workers, holding documents that would destroy the Reed family's reputation and finances. That evening, I received a text from Ethan. Mom, please call me. Savannah's family is falling apart. Can't we work something out? I deleted the message without responding. Friday morning brought my favorite development. Martin Reed, accompanied by two attorneys who looked like they had graduated from law school the previous week, attempting to enter what used to be his company. I watched from my office window as security politely but firmly explained that he had no business on the premises. He gestured wildly, pointing at the building, at his name still etched in the cornerstone, at the parking space that had been his for 20 years. None of it mattered. The building was mine now. The business was mine. The employees were mine. The future was mine. His past was all he had left, and the past doesn't pay legal bills. I walked down to the lobby, my heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of a countdown clock. "Martin," I said, my voice carrying the professional courtesy of a funeral director. "Is there something I can help you with? You've destroyed my life." His voice cracked like thin ice. My company, my reputation, my family's future, all because of a misunderstanding at a wedding.
No, Martín.
I've revealed the truth about how you've been running this company. The environmental violations, the wage theft, the kickback schemes, those weren't misunderstandings. Those were choices you made every day for 4 years. But you wouldn't have looked if your daughter hadn't insulted me.
You're probably right.
I would have remained a silent investor, collected my returns, and let you continue cheating your workers and poisoning the environment. I adjusted my pearl necklace, letting the gesture sink in. Ironic, isn't it? Savannah's cruelty is what exposed your criminality. You might want to thank her. His lawyers exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand that their client had picked a fight with someone who collected enemies like vintage wines, carefully, patiently, and with an eye toward the perfect moment to open them. "What do you want?" Martin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want your daughter to learn that cruelty is expensive. I want your wife to discover that laughing at other people's humiliation can be a very temporary pleasure." I smiled with the warmth of an Arctic morning. "Most of all, I want you to remember this moment every time you're tempted to underestimate someone based on their age, gender, or willingness to be gracious. And then, there is no and then, Martin.
This is your life now.
Regulatory investigations, civil lawsuits, criminal referrals, and the slow, methodical destruction of everything you built through cutting corners and cheating people." I turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Martin? Give my regards to Savannah. I'm sure she's learning some very interesting lessons about social media and public relations." That afternoon, my media team showed me the latest social media analytics. #DisgustingFamilyBusiness was trending. The hashtag had started organically when someone posted the wedding video alongside news coverage of the Reed footwear investigation. Savannah had tried to control the narrative with a series of Instagram posts about family loyalty and standing by her husband. But every post was flooded with comments about her father's business practices and her public humiliation of an elder. The influencer economy, built on aspirational perfection, had no tolerance for association with environmental crime and wage theft. Brand partnerships were being reassessed. Followers were disappearing like snow in spring rain. That evening, I had dinner at my usual table at Le Bernardin alone by choice, with a view of the city lights and a bottle of wine that cost more than Martin Reed's former monthly salary. My phone buzzed with notifications I didn't bother to check. Text messages from Ethan that I wouldn't answer. Voicemails from reporters that Patricia would handle. Legal documents that James would file with surgical precision. The Reed family was learning that embarrassment was not just a momentary social inconvenience. It was a condition that, properly managed, could become permanent. I raised my wine glass to the window, where my reflection looked back at me with a satisfied expression of someone who had spent 62 years learning how to fight and was finally using all of it. "To the Reed family," I said quietly, "may you find the humility you tried to teach me." The wine tasted like victory, and victory tasted like justice served at exactly the right temperature. I need to pause here and talk to you about something crucial. Victoria's story illustrates a principle that our book Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain covers extensively in Chapter 9, the difference between justice and revenge. Victoria didn't create the Reed family's legal problems. She simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. There's a powerful lesson here about how we often enable bad behavior by staying silent. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the natural results of their choices. The book includes worksheets to help you identify when you're protecting people who should be protecting themselves. Check the link in the description. Victoria's revenge is just getting started. What she does next will permanently alter the Reed family's social standing and financial future. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because this gets much more intense. The call from Ethan came at 6:47 a.m. on Saturday morning while I was having coffee and reading the financial section of the Times. His name appeared on my phone screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering. Not from spite, but from the understanding that desperation should always wait for composure. Hello, Ethan. Mom, we need to talk. In person. Today. His voice carried the strain of someone who had spent sleepless nights discovering that his choices had prices he couldn't afford. I'm listening. Not over the phone. This is family business. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. Family business? How interesting. I wasn't aware you still considered me family, given your response to your wife's public humiliation of me. That's what I want to talk about. There's been a misunderstanding. Ethan, I have video footage from 17 different angles. I have audio recordings from 12 separate phones. There was no misunderstanding. There was an insult, followed by laughter, followed by your choice to pretend it didn't happen. Silence on the line. Then, can we meet? 1 hour. That's all I'm asking. My office.
Noon.
Bring your lawyer. My lawyer? Mom, this is a family conversation.
No, Ethan.
This is a business conversation about family assets. If you want to discuss the Hale Family Trust, you need legal representation. If you want to discuss your mother's feelings, you need a therapist. Choose accordingly. I hung up before he could respond and spent the next 5 hours reviewing documents that would change my son's life forever. The Hale Family Trust had been established when Ethan turned 21, a comprehensive estate planning vehicle designed to transfer wealth across generations while maintaining family values and social responsibility. At the time, I had been proud to create something that would ensure my son's future while encouraging him to build upon the legacy I was creating. The trust documents, however, contained provisions that my younger, more optimistic self had insisted upon. Clauses about character, integrity, and respect for family. Specific language about sustained disrespect toward the settlor, meaning me, and the trustee's authority to modify or revoke distributions based on beneficiary conduct. My attorney had thought the moral clauses were unnecessary. Victoria, James had said, you're planning for your son to inherit billions. Why complicate it with subjective standards? Because money without character is just ammunition for people who will use it badly, I had replied. If I'm going to create generational wealth, I want to create generational wisdom. Now, 15 years later, those clauses were about to prove their value. At noon precisely, Ethan arrived at my office accompanied by Richard Steinberg, a family law attorney whose reputation was built on protecting rich people from the consequences of their poor decisions. They sat across from my conference table like defendants waiting for sentencing. I opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a stack of documents. Ethan, we need to discuss your status as a beneficiary of the Hale Family Trust. Richard leaned forward. Mrs. Hale, I've advised Ethan that any changes to the trust would need to be discussed with all parties and potentially challenged in probate court. Mr. Steinberg, I am the settlor. the trustee, and the trust protector. I don't need anyone's permission to enforce the existing terms. I slid a copy of the trust document across the table. Page 47, Section 12, Subsection C. Would you please read it aloud? Richard found the page and read in a voice that grew smaller with each word. In the event that any beneficiary engages in sustained conduct that demonstrates fundamental disrespect toward the settler, including but not limited to public humiliation, character assassination, or willful abandonment during times of crisis, the trustee may, in her sole discretion, suspend, modify, or terminate said beneficiary's interest in the trust. Ethan's face had gone the color of old newspaper. Mom, you can't be serious. That was written 15 years ago. It was theoretical. Nothing I write is theoretical, Ethan. I am always serious about money, family, and consequences. I opened another folder. These are screenshots from your wife's social media posts, transcripts of her public statements about me, and photographic evidence of your response, or lack thereof, during the wedding reception incident. I spread the evidence across the table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Your wife called me a disgusting family embarrassment in front of 300 witnesses. Her parents laughed. You pretended not to hear and walked away. I met his eyes directly. That constitutes sustained disrespect and willful abandonment during a time of crisis. It was one incident.
No, Ethan.
It was a pattern of behavior that culminated in one public incident. For months, your wife has been making disparaging comments about me to friends, family, and social media contacts. She has consistently portrayed me as an obstacle to your happiness rather than the woman who provided every advantage you've ever enjoyed. I pulled out another document. This is a compilation of her social media activity regarding me over the past year. Would you like me to read some excerpts? Ethan shook his head. The trust suspension takes effect immediately. Your monthly distributions are terminated. Your access to trust-funded assets is revoked. The penthouse apartment, which is owned by a trust subsidiary, reverts to trust control. Richard tried to interject. Mrs. Hale, surely some accommodation can be reached. Mr. Steinberg, your client had every opportunity to demonstrate loyalty to the family that gave him everything. He chose to prioritize people who laughed at his mother's humiliation over the mother who built the wealth they're all so eager to access. I closed the folder with finality. There are consequences to that choice. What about Savannah? Ethan's voice cracked. She's pregnant. We're starting a family. Congratulations. I hope you've been saving money, because trust funds are no longer available to support your lifestyle. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. You have 30 days to vacate the penthouse. The building management company will coordinate the transition. Mom, please. If you do this, I'll never. He stopped himself, realizing what he was about to threaten. You'll never what, Ethan? Speak to me again? Choose them over me? Allow your wife to insult me publicly? I smiled with the warmth of January rain. You've already done all of those things. I'm simply adjusting my financial planning to reflect your priorities. After they left, I walked to my window wall and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, the Reed family was discovering that their social and financial destruction had been just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. I called Patricia. Please arrange for the penthouse to be cleared and prepared for sale. Everything personal should be boxed and delivered to Mr. Ethan's alternate address. Everything else goes to charity. Of course, Ms. Hale. Will you be attending the sheriff's posting?
No.
I have more important things to do than watch my son learn that actions have prices. That evening, as I reviewed quarterly reports in my home office, my phone buzzed with a notification from my building's security system. Ethan and Savannah had arrived to collect their belongings. I watched them through the security monitors as they loaded boxes into a rented U-Haul truck. Savannah was crying, ugly, Desperate tears that had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with the realization that her comfortable future had evaporated between lunch and dinner. Ethan looked like a man who had aged a decade in 6 hours. His movements were mechanical, defeated. The confident young man who had walked away from his mother's humiliation had been replaced by someone learning that family money was not a right, but a privilege that could be revoked.
My phone rang.
Ethan's number. I let it ring. He called back immediately. I let it ring again. The third call, I answered. Yes. Mom, please. We'll do whatever you want. We'll apologize publicly. We'll make it right. Ethan, you're speaking to the wrong parent. You should be having this conversation with your wife's family. They're the ones you chose. They're the ones who should support the consequences of their choices. They can't. Martin's company is gone. They're facing lawsuits. Colette's foundation is being investigated. Yes, I'm aware of their legal difficulties. I created most of them. My voice carried the temperature of liquid nitrogen. Perhaps you should have considered that before laughing along with their cruel jokes. I never laughed. You did something worse than laugh, Ethan. You walked away. You abandoned your mother to protect your comfort. I paused, letting the words settle. That was your choice. This is mine. I hung up and turned off my phone. From my penthouse windows, I could see the U-Haul truck pulling away from the building, carrying my son and his wife toward a future where trust funds and family wealth were memories instead of certainties. I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it to my reflection in the window. To the price of choosing poorly, I said aloud. May the lesson be expensive enough to be permanent. The wine tasted like justice, and justice tasted like the understanding that some bridges need to be burned to stop the wrong people from crossing them. Monday morning brought coffee that smelled like victory and newspapers that read like a scorecard. The Reed family's legal troubles had made the business section of 3 major papers, each article more damaging than the last. Environmental violations cost local family business. Worker wage theft investigation expands. Charity kickback scheme under federal review. I was reviewing the coverage when Patricia knocked on my office door. Ms. Hale, James Morrison is here with the forensic audit results. Send him in. James entered carrying the kind of thick legal folders that usually preceded either very good news or complete annihilation. His expression suggested the latter, at least for someone who wasn't me. Victoria, we've found something extraordinary. The vendor kickback scheme was more sophisticated than we initially thought. He opened the red folder with the care of someone handling evidence. Savannah Reed has been receiving payments through a Shell LLC registered to her personal styling company. I leaned forward, my interest sharpening. Show me. Reed Footwear has been paying influencer marketing fees to Save Style Consulting, a company owned entirely by Savannah, for social media promotion of Reed products. The payments were authorized by her father and processed through the company's marketing budget. He slid financial records across my desk. The problem is, there's no evidence that any actual marketing services were provided. I studied the bank records with the same intensity one had once used to read seismic surveys. Regular payments of $8,500 per month for 18 months. Total, $153,000 in fraudulent invoices. What kind of services were supposedly provided? Instagram posts, influencer partnerships, brand representation at social events. James smiled grimly. We subpoenaed her social media accounts. In 18 months, she posted exactly 3 photos wearing Reed Footwear products. No partnerships, no brand events, no marketing campaigns. So, she was essentially stealing money from her father's company to fund her lifestyle, while the company was cutting worker wages and deferring environmental compliance. Yes. I closed the folder with the satisfaction of a chess player who had just spotted checkmate in 3 moves. File civil suits against both Savannah and the styling company. Fraud, unjust enrichment, conspiracy. I want every dollar recovered, plus damages. What about criminal referrals? Let's let the civil suit establish the facts first. Criminal charges will be more effective once we have a judgment demonstrating the intentional nature of the fraud. That afternoon, I decided to take a more personal approach to the Reed family's education. Instead of another press conference or legal filing, I would host an event that would demonstrate the difference between earned wealth and stolen comfort. The Workers' Recognition Gala would be held in the main factory floor of the former Reed Footwear Works, now officially renamed Hale Manufacturing Division. The space would be transformed into an elegant venue, with the machinery as a backdrop and the workers as the guests of honor. Patricia, I want invitations sent to every employee and their families. Full dinner, open bar, live music. I want this to be the kind of event that Reed workers never got to attend when Martin was running the company. What about media coverage? Invite the local press, but make it clear this is about celebrating workers, not attacking the previous management. Let the contrast speak for itself. The invitations went out Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the RSVPs were flooding back. 43 employees and their families, all eager to attend an elegant event in their honor. The same day, process servers found Savannah at a trendy brunch spot in the Arts District, surrounded by the kind of social media friends who disappeared when the cameras stopped flashing. The civil lawsuit was delivered to her table just as her eggs Benedict arrived. I wasn't there to witness it personally, but my private investigator provided a detailed report. Savannah had opened the legal documents in front of her brunch companions, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, the pale horror of someone realizing that their comfortable life had just become very uncomfortable. She had tried to maintain composure, but the document was explicit. Victoria Hale versus Savannah Reed and SaveStyle Consulting LLC, claiming $153,000 in fraudulent payments plus punitive damages, attorney fees, and a court order freezing her assets, pending resolution. Her Instagram story that afternoon was a masterclass in damage control gone wrong. Sometimes family members use their resources to hurt people they're supposed to love, she posted, apparently not realizing that admitting to being hurt by the lawsuit was the same as admitting the lawsuit was justified. The comments section became a battlefield. Her remaining followers were split between those expressing sympathy and those pointing out that stealing money from workers' wages to fund a luxury lifestyle wasn't exactly a sympathetic position. Thursday brought the gala preparation. I walked through the factory floor as event planners transformed industrial space into something that belonged in a magazine. White draping concealed the machinery without hiding it entirely. Crystal chandeliers suspended from the ceiling created pools of warm light. Round tables set with white linens and silver service made the space feel elegant without forgetting its purpose. The contrast was intentional and powerful. Beauty built on a foundation of honest work, elegance that celebrated labor instead of exploiting it. Friday evening, as guests arrived in their best clothes, I stood at the entrance, wearing a midnight blue gown and my grandmother's diamond necklace, jewelry that had been earned through 3 generations of women who understood the difference between wealth and worth. Each worker and their family was greeted personally. I shook hands, learned names, asked about children and dreams and plans for the future. These were the people Martin Reed had seen as expenses. I saw them as the foundation of everything valuable the company had ever produced. The local news cameras captured it all. Workers who had been underpaid for years enjoying an elegant dinner in their honor, served by the woman who had rescued their jobs and raised their wages while their former boss faced federal investigation. I gave a brief speech before dinner. Nothing theatrical, just simple recognition. When I acquired this company, I inherited more than buildings and equipment. I inherited a workforce of skilled, dedicated professionals who had been undervalued for too long. I gestured to the tables filled with workers and their families. Tonight is about recognizing what you've always deserved: respect, fair compensation, and celebration of the craftsmanship that built this company's reputation. The applause was genuine, warm, sustained. Not the polite clapping of a corporate event, but the appreciation of people who had rarely been acknowledged for their contributions. As dinner was served, I noticed the local newspaper photographer capturing images that would tell the story perfectly. Workers in their finest clothes, enjoying an elegant meal in the space where they created value every day, hosted by the woman who had purchased their company specifically to treat them better. The contrast with Martin Reed's legacy was unavoidable and devastating. Saturday morning brought the newspaper coverage I had anticipated. New owner honors workers with elegant gala. From wage theft to worker appreciation, a company's transformation. Hale Manufacturing celebrates employees previous owner exploited. But the coverage I enjoyed most was unplanned. A social media post from one of the workers' teenage daughters showing her mother in an evening gown, smiling at an elegantly set table. Mom worked for 15 years making shoes for people who never knew her name, the post read. Last night, the new owner threw a party just to say thank you. This is what it looks like when good people are in charge. Hashtag workers deserve respect. Hashtag Halumph. The post went viral locally, shared hundreds of times with comments celebrating the worker-focused approach and contrasting it with the previous management's legal troubles. Savannah's response was swift and ill-advised. An Instagram story calling the gala performative and suggesting I was buying good press with events that real working families can't afford. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Comments poured in pointing out that the gala had cost me personally while her father had been stealing from the workers' wages. Users dug up old posts showing her expensive lifestyle funded by the same company that was underpaying its employees. Within hours, she had deleted the story, but screenshots had already spread across social media platforms. The narrative was set, entitled Rich Daughter Criticizing Working Family Celebration While Facing Fraud Charges for Stealing from Their Wages. Her remaining brand partnerships began reassessing their relationships. Her follower count, already declining, accelerated its downward spiral. Monday morning brought a call from Richard Steinberg, Ethan's attorney. Mrs. Hale, I represent Savannah Reed as well as your son. We'd like to discuss a settlement regarding the civil lawsuit.
I'm listening.
Ms. Reed is prepared to acknowledge that some payments may have been inappropriate and is willing to discuss repayment terms that don't require litigation. Mr. Steinberg, your client committed fraud. She stole $153,000 from workers' wages to fund her lifestyle. There's nothing inappropriate about it. It was criminal. Surely some accommodation. The accommodation is that I'm allowing her to face civil rather than criminal consequences first. If she wants to avoid federal fraud charges, she can repay every stolen dollar plus damages and publicly acknowledge her theft. Public acknowledgement is not possible. Then we'll let a jury decide whether her Instagram lifestyle was worth destroying workers' livelihoods. I hung up before he could respond. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Colette Reed appeared in my office reception area without an appointment, her face carrying the desperate expression of someone whose comfortable world was collapsing in real time. Patricia announced her arrival with professional skepticism. Mrs. Reed is here requesting a meeting. She says it's urgent. Send her in. Colette entered my office looking older than her years, her usually perfect appearance showing the strain of sleepless nights and legal consultations. She sat across from my desk without being invited, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched an expensive handbag that would probably need to be sold to pay legal fees. Ms. Hale, I came to ask you to stop this.
Please.
My family is being destroyed. Your family destroyed itself, Mrs. Reed. I'm simply declining to help cover up the damage. Savannah made a mistake at the wedding. Young people say things. Mrs. Reed, your daughter didn't make a mistake. She revealed her character. The mistake was mine, in thinking that character might improve with time and consequences. I leaned forward slightly. But this isn't about the wedding anymore. This is about the systematic fraud your family committed against working people who trusted them. We can pay back the money. With what money? Your husband's company is gone. Your charitable foundation is under federal investigation. Your daughter's influence marketing business is facing fraud charges. I smiled with the warmth of polished marble. Where exactly will this repayment money come from? Colette was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes held the defeated expression of someone who had finally understood that actions have prices, and some prices can't be negotiated down. What do you want from us? I want you to understand that humiliating people has consequences. I want your daughter to learn that stealing from workers isn't a victimless crime. I want your family to discover that reputation, once lost through your own choices, can't be bought back with apologies or settlements. And then what? When we've learned these lessons, what then? I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Then you live with what you've learned, Mrs. Reed, because that's what the rest of us have to do. After she left, I stood at my office window, looking down at the city where the Reed family was learning that embarrassment was not a momentary social inconvenience, but a permanent condition that, properly managed, would follow them for the rest of their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from James Morrison. Federal prosecutors want to meet about criminal referrals. Are you ready for the next phase? I smiled and typed back. Schedule the meeting. It's time for the Reed family's education to become more expensive. The view from my window had never looked better. 2 months after the wedding that changed everything, I stood in the conference room of what was now Hale Manufacturing Division, reviewing architectural plans for the complete renovation of the facility. The blueprints spread across the table like promises of a future the Reed family would never see. The environmental remediation will take 6 weeks, explained Janet Morrison, the lead contractor. New filtration systems, upgraded waste processing, and complete soil restoration in the tannery area. The EPA violations will be fully addressed. And the worker facilities? New break rooms, upgraded safety equipment, modernized ventilation systems throughout the factory floor. She pointed to sections of the blueprint highlighted in green. The investment is substantial, but it will bring the facility up to best-in-class standards. I nodded, approving expenses that Martin Reed had avoided for years while funding his family's comfortable lifestyle. How long for the complete renovation? 4 months total. The workers can remain employed throughout the process. We'll renovate in sections to maintain production. Excellent. Beginning immediately. That afternoon, I held what I privately called the funeral, a ceremonial removal of the Reed Footwear Works signage that had marked the building for 40 years. I invited all employees and their families, along with local media, to witness the transition from a company that had exploited them to one that honored them. The old sign came down to genuine applause. Workers who had endured years of wage stagnation and safety violations cheered as cranes lifted away the name that had become synonymous with worker exploitation and environmental degradation. In its place, a new sign went up. Hale Manufacturing Division, American craftsmanship, American values. I stood before the assembled crowd wearing my signature pearls and a navy blue coat that cost more than Martin Reed's former monthly salary, but I spoke the language of people who understood the dignity of honest work. When I purchased this company, I didn't just buy buildings and equipment. I bought the opportunity to honor the skilled craftspeople who create value through their dedication and expertise. I gestured to the workers gathered with their families. The name on the building has changed, but the people who make this company valuable remain the same. That's exactly as it should be. The local news cameras captured it all. Workers celebrating the end of an era that had undervalued them, children sitting on their parents' shoulders to watch history being made, a new owner who treated employees as assets rather than expenses. The contrast with the Reed family's legacy was unavoidable and permanent. That evening, I hosted a private auction in what had been Martin Reed's executive office. The contents, his personal furniture, artwork, and luxury accessories, were sold to benefit the Worker Hardship Fund I had established for employees injured under the previous management's negligent safety standards. Martin's handcrafted oak desk, the one where he had signed documents authorizing below-market wages while approving kickback payments to his wife's foundation, sold for $3,200. His leather executive chair brought $850. The crystal decanter set he used for client meetings fetched $450. Every dollar went directly to workers who had suffered injuries that Martin Reed had ignored or covered up to avoid regulatory scrutiny. I didn't attend the auction personally. I had more important things to do than watch furniture that had presided over worker exploitation be converted into funds for worker compensation. But Patricia provided a detailed report, including the information that Martin had attempted to attend, hoping to buy back some of his personal items. He was turned away at the door. The auction was for workers and supporters of worker rights. He qualified as neither. The following week brought the launch of my Embarrassment Edition product line, a limited series of handcrafted boots that told the story of what happened when people mistook elegance for weakness. Each pair was hand-numbered and came with a certificate of authenticity signed by me personally. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. The same skilled workers who had been underpaid for years now had the resources and support to create their finest work. The marketing was subtle but devastating, built by American craftspeople who understand the difference between quality and appearance. Each pair tells the story of work performed with dignity and integrity. The boots sold out in 4 hours. More importantly, they sold out to customers who knew exactly what they were buying. Footwear that represented the triumph of honest craftsmanship over exploitative management, created by workers who were finally receiving fair compensation and safe working conditions. The waiting list for the second production run exceeded 2,000 customers within the first week. That month also brought the press conference I had been anticipating since the day I acquired the company. Not in my office or the factory floor, but in the courthouse steps, where justice wore a blindfold and carried a scale that always balanced in the end. Federal prosecutors had completed their investigation of the Reed family's business practices. The results were more comprehensive than even I had hoped. The indictment against Martin Reed includes 15 counts of environmental crimes, 12 counts of wage and hour violations, and 6 counts of fraud related to the misuse of business funds for political donations, announced Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Mitchell. The investigation revealed systematic violations spanning for years and affecting both workers and the environment. Colette Reed has been indicted on 8 counts of fraud and money laundering related to kickback payments to her charitable foundation. The foundation has been dissolved and its assets are being held pending restitution to affected parties. Savannah Reed faces 6 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy related to the theft of company funds through her fake consulting business. The reporters asked the expected questions about my role in the investigation. Mrs. Hale's cooperation with federal investigators has been complete and voluntary, Attorney Mitchell explained. As the new owner of the company, she was legally obligated to report the violations she discovered, and she has done so with exemplary corporate citizenship. I wasn't present for the press conference. I was in my office, reviewing quarterly reports that showed Hale Manufacturing Division was already operating at 23% higher efficiency than under Reed management, with 100% compliance with environmental and safety regulations. But I watched the coverage that evening, noting with satisfaction how the narrative had evolved from business acquisition to worker protection to federal justice. The Reed family's crimes were now a matter of public record, not social media speculation. Their humiliation was complete, permanent, and entirely self-inflicted. The following day brought news that completed the circle: Martin Reed's personal assets. His house, cars, and investment accounts had been frozen pending restitution payments to the workers he had cheated and the environmental cleanup he had avoided. The lake house where his family had spent summers while deferring worker safety improvements was now property of the federal government, held in trust until it could be sold to fund worker compensation. The BMW and Mercedes that had been purchased with profits stolen from employee wages were being auctioned, with proceeds going to the same hardship fund that had benefited from his office furniture sale. Even their personal jewelry, Colette's collection of expensive pieces purchased with kickback money, had been seized as proceeds of criminal activity. The Reed family had been systematically stripped of everything they had gained through their exploitation of workers and the environment. What remained was exactly what they deserved, the consequences of their choices, with interest compounded daily. That evening, I received a call from Ethan. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Mom, I need to ask you something.
I'm listening.
Did you plan this? All of it? From the beginning? I considered the question carefully. I planned to acquire an undervalued company with good bones and poor management. I planned to improve working conditions and environmental compliance. I planned to operate legally and ethically. I paused. What I didn't plan was discovering systematic criminal activity that needed to be reported to federal authorities. But if Savannah hadn't, if your wife hadn't publicly humiliated me, I might have remained a silent investor, content with financial returns and basic compliance improvements. My voice carried the temperature of legal documents. Her cruelty revealed your family's character. That led me to examine the company's records more carefully. That examination revealed crimes that demanded justice. So, this is revenge.
No, Ethan.
Revenge would be irrational, emotional, disproportionate to the offense. I walked to my window wall, looking out at the city where the Reed family was learning what justice looked like when properly applied. This is consequences. Proportional, legal, inevitable consequences. What's the difference? Revenge seeks to cause pain. Justice seeks to restore balance. I smiled at my reflection in the window. The pain your wife's family is experiencing is incidental to the justice they're receiving. He was quiet for a long moment. Will you ever forgive them? Forgiveness is for people who acknowledge their mistakes and demonstrate genuine change. Your wife's family continues to portray themselves as victims of my vindictiveness rather than criminals facing appropriate consequences. I turned away from the window. When they're ready to take responsibility for their actions, we can discuss forgiveness. Until then, they can live with justice. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and reviewed the latest financial reports from Hale Manufacturing Division. Worker productivity was up 31%. Product quality ratings had improved across all lines. Customer satisfaction scores were at historic highs. Environmental compliance was perfect. Most satisfying of all, the company was more profitable treating workers fairly than it had ever been while exploiting them. Martin Reed had been wrong about everything that mattered. Wrong about worker motivation, wrong about quality standards, wrong about environmental responsibility, and catastrophically wrong about the woman he had laughed at in a wedding reception line. I raised my wine glass to my reflection in the window. To the Reed family, I said aloud, may they finally learn the lessons they've been avoiding their entire lives. The wine tasted like justice, and justice tasted like the understanding that some people need to lose everything they've stolen before they can learn the value of what they should have earned. I want to pause Victoria's story here to address something important. Many of you watching might wonder if Victoria went too far. Victoria didn't create the Reed family's legal problems. She simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own illegal actions. This is a crucial distinction that too many of us miss when dealing with toxic people in our lives. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step aside and let reality teach the lessons you can't. Check the link in the description. Victoria's story is approaching its climax, and what happens next will show you exactly why some people should never be underestimated. The federal courthouse in downtown Boston was built to inspire reverence for justice. Marble columns that reached toward heaven, bronze scales that promised fairness, and courtrooms where truth was supposed to matter more than money or social status. On Tuesday morning in November, 6 months after the wedding that started everything, Martin Reed sat across a mahogany table from federal prosecutors and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It was the first time in his adult life that he would be held to that standard. I wasn't present for the deposition. Criminal proceedings don't require victim attendance, and I had never been interested in watching people destroy themselves when I could read about it later in legally precise transcripts. But James Morrison attended as my representative, and his evening report was more satisfying than any theatrical performance. Victoria, Martin Reed is a man who has spent 40 years believing that charm could substitute for competence, James told me as we sat in my office, reviewing the day's testimony. Under oath, without social lubricant or family support, he's just another middle-aged man who made terrible decisions and got caught. The transcript made for fascinating reading. Martin Reed, confronted with 4 years of documented evidence, had attempted every defense except the one that might have helped him, taking responsibility. He blamed global economic pressures for cutting worker wages, while his wine club membership auto-drafted $800 monthly from company accounts. He blamed regulatory overreach for environmental violations that he had systematically covered up to avoid compliance costs. He blamed accounting errors for the political slush fund that had been disguised as leather treatment expenses. When prosecutors showed him photographs of the company fleet, 5 luxury vehicles that had been purchased for business purposes but used exclusively for family transportation, he blamed operational efficiency for putting his wife's BMW on the company insurance policy. Mr. Reed, the prosecutor had asked, "Can you explain why operational efficiency required your daughter to have access to company credit cards for personal styling and beauty expenses?" Savannah was representing the company brand through social media. Mr. Reed, we've reviewed your daughter's social media presence. In 4 years, she posted exactly 11 photos wearing Reed footwear products. Can you explain how $153,000 in company payments were justified by 11 social media posts? Martin had no explanation that wouldn't constitute an admission of fraud. The most damaging moment came when prosecutors asked about worker safety violations that had resulted in 3 serious injuries over 2 years. Injuries that had been reported to workers' compensation insurance, but not to OSHA, as required by law. Mr. Reed, did you personally approve the decision to classify these workplace injuries as pre-existing conditions rather than work-related incidents? I relied on advice from our insurance representative. Mr. Reed, we have emails from the insurance representative recommending OSHA notification for all 3 incidents. We have your responses rejecting those recommendations. Did you, or did you not personally decide to conceal workplace safety violations from federal regulators? Martin Reed, under oath and facing perjury charges if he lied, had been forced to admit that he had deliberately concealed worker injuries to avoid safety inspections that would have revealed the equipment violations he had been ignoring for years. Wednesday brought Colette Reed's deposition, a performance that made her husband's testimony look masterful by comparison. Colette had apparently believed that her charitable foundation work and social connections would provide some protection from federal scrutiny. She was wrong about that, just as she had been wrong about everything else. Mrs. Reed, can you explain why Evergreen Environmental Foundation received $47,000 in vendor payments from Reed Footwear Works while providing no environmental services? The foundation supported environmental awareness through community education. Mrs. Reed, can you show us any educational programs, community events, or environmental projects funded by your foundation? Silence on the transcript, followed by, "The foundation was in a planning phase." Mrs. Reed, the foundation existed for 3 years and received $127,000 in total donations, all from Reed footwear vendors. Can you explain how a planning phase requires $127,000 over 3 years? Administrative costs. Mrs. Reed, according to your foundation's tax filings, administrative costs included $23,000 for travel expenses, $18,000 for restaurant meals, $12,000 for what you classified as research materials, and $8,000 for what appears to be cosmetic procedures. Can you explain how these expenses furthered environmental awareness? Colette Reed, faced with her own documented greed, had attempted to claim that environmental leadership requires maintaining professional appearance and networking through social events. The prosecutors had not been impressed with that explanation. Friday brought the deposition I had been most eager to read. Savannah Reed, social media influencer, fraud defendant, and the woman whose cruelty had triggered the complete destruction of her family's comfortable life. Savannah had arrived at the federal courthouse, wearing designer clothes purchased with stolen money, accompanied by lawyers she couldn't afford, maintaining the performance of victimhood that had sustained her through 6 months of criminal investigation. Under oath, that performance crumbled like sandcastles at high tide. Ms. Reed, you received $153,000 from Reed Footwear Works between January 2019 and June 2020 for social media marketing services. Can you describe the services you provided? I promoted the brand through my social media presence and lifestyle representation. Ms. Reed, we've analyzed your social media accounts for that period. You have 47,000 Instagram followers and posted 312 times during the 18 months in question. Of those 312 posts, exactly 3 featured Reed footwear products. Can you explain how 3 posts justified $153,000 in payments? Brand representation is more than just product placement. It's about lifestyle association and aspirational marketing. Ms. Reed, can you provide evidence of any marketing strategy, campaign planning, or promotional activities beyond those 3 Instagram posts? Silence. Ms. Reed, did you provide Reed Footwear Works with analytics, engagement reports, conversion data, or any other documentation typically associated with professional marketing services? The relationship was more informal. Ms. Reed, $153,000 is not an informal amount of money. Were you aware that these payments were being deducted from the company's marketing budget while worker wages remained stagnant? I wasn't involved in company financial decisions. Ms. Reed, you were receiving company payments. You were absolutely involved in company financial decisions. Were you aware that your father was cutting worker benefits while approving your monthly payments? This was where Savannah made her fatal mistake. Instead of admitting ignorance or claiming to have been misled by her father, she attempted to justify the payments by claiming they were compensation for family sacrifices related to the business. My family built that company from nothing. We deserved to benefit from its success. Ms. Reed, your family benefited from the company's success through salary, benefits, and profit distributions. The payments to your consulting company were separate from those benefits and were obtained through fraudulent invoices for services you didn't provide. Do you understand the difference? I provided value through brand association. Ms. Reed, let me ask you directly. Did you knowingly submit invoices for marketing services you had not performed? Under oath, facing perjury charges, Savannah had been forced to admit that she had invoiced for services she hadn't provided, using money that should have gone to worker wages and safety improvements. But the most damaging moment came when prosecutors asked about the wedding incident that had started everything. Ms. Reed, are you familiar with the phrase disgusting family embarrassment? I may have used those words, but Ms. Reed, you used those words to describe Victoria Hale, the woman who is now your father's former business partner and the person who reported your family's crimes to federal authorities. Do you see any connection between your public humiliation of Ms. Hale and the investigation that followed? This was where Savannah revealed the entitlement and lack of insight that had made her destruction inevitable. If Victoria Hale wasn't so vindictive and petty, she would have handled family issues privately instead of destroying people's lives over a wedding joke. Ms. Reed, your family wasn't destroyed by a wedding joke. Your family was destroyed by 4 years of criminal activity that was discovered when Ms. Hale became your father's business partner and was legally obligated to report the violations she found. Do you understand that distinction? She only looked for violations because she was angry. Ms. Reed, are you suggesting that crimes should go unreported if they're discovered by people who've been personally insulted by the criminals? The questioning had continued for 6 hours, with Savannah increasingly revealing herself as someone who believed that being humiliated justified committing fraud, and that being caught committing fraud was evidence of persecution rather than justice. By the end of her deposition, she had provided federal prosecutors with everything they needed to demonstrate that her crimes were intentional, ongoing, and committed with full knowledge of their impact on workers and the environment. That evening, James Morrison delivered his final assessment of the depositions. Victoria, they've buried themselves. Martin admitted to systematically violating safety and environmental regulations to protect profits. Colette admitted to using a fake charity to launder vendor kickbacks. Savannah admitted to billing for services she didn't provide while claiming she deserved the money because of her family's ownership stake. What about criminal liability? Federal prosecutors have everything they need: environmental crimes, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, tax evasion. The Reed family has provided evidence for a comprehensive criminal case. He smiled grimly. They've also provided evidence of consciousness of guilt, lack of remorse, and ongoing attempts to avoid responsibility. Sentencing recommendations? Based on federal guidelines and the scope of the criminal activity, Martin is looking at 8 to 12 years. Colette faces 5 to 8 years. Savannah could get 6 to 10 years, especially with the aggravating factor of her continued defiance and lack of acceptance of responsibility. I leaned back in my chair, considering the information. The Reed family had spent 6 months portraying themselves as victims of my vindictiveness. Under oath, they had revealed themselves as criminals who felt entitled to steal from workers and destroy the environment while maintaining comfortable lifestyles. Their own words had destroyed them more completely than any revenge I could have designed. Schedule a meeting with the federal prosecutors, I told James. I want to discuss victim impact statements and restitution procedures. Of course. And Victoria? Yes. Justice is going to be very expensive for the Reed family. More expensive than they can possibly afford. I smiled and looked out at the city lights, where somewhere the Reed family was learning that truth, under oath, was a luxury they couldn't afford and a weapon they couldn't escape. Perfect, I said. That's exactly what justice should cost. December brought the kind of cold that made Boston look like a black and white photograph. Bare trees etched against gray sky, sidewalks slick with ice that reflected the harsh beauty of a winter that stripped away everything non-essential, including the Reed family's remaining pretenses. The vendor exodus began the Monday after the depositions were leaked to the business press. Not the full transcripts, those remained sealed pending trial, but enough details to make clear that Martin Reed had admitted under oath to systematic fraud, environmental crimes, and worker exploitation. By Wednesday, every major supplier who had done business with Reed Footwear Works for decades had publicly switched their allegiances to Hale Manufacturing Division. The statements were professionally worded but devastatingly clear. After reviewing recent developments, we are confident that Hale Manufacturing represents the ethical standards and operational excellence we require in our business partnerships. Translation: we're distancing ourselves from criminals and associating with winners. The social media response was swift and merciless. Hashtag Reed Footwear Fraud began trending as workers shared stories of wage theft, safety violations, and environmental damage they had been forced to endure while the Reed family lived in luxury funded by stolen money. But the coverage that destroyed Savannah's remaining social credibility came from an unexpected source: Boston Lifestyle magazine, which had featured her in a Young Socialites to Watch article just 6 months earlier. The follow-up piece was titled "The Price of Influence: When Lifestyle Bloggers Break the Law." Savannah Reed built her social media presence on aspirational content, designer clothes, expensive vacations, and luxury accessories that her followers assumed were funded by legitimate business success. Federal prosecutors now allege that her lifestyle was actually funded by fraudulent invoices submitted to her father's company while workers were denied wage increases and safety improvements. The article included side-by-side photos: Savannah in a $3,000 dress posing at a charity gala, next to factory workers in worn uniforms operating outdated equipment that should have been replaced with the money that funded her wardrobe. The visual contrast was devastating and permanent. Her remaining brand partnerships disappeared overnight. Companies that had paid for her endorsements now faced questions about their due diligence in working with someone whose lifestyle was allegedly funded by worker exploitation and environmental crimes. Her Instagram account, once a carefully curated museum of aspirational living, became a liability. Comments on every post now included references to fraud money and blood diamonds and stolen wages. Her follower count, already declining, accelerated its freefall. She tried damage control, a series of posts about family loyalty and standing by her husband during difficult times. But every post was flooded with responses from workers, their families, and environmental activists who had no patience for someone portraying herself as a victim while facing federal fraud charges. The tipping point came when she posted a photo of herself at a spa with the caption "Self-Care Sunday because you can't pour from an empty cup." The backlash was swift and brutal. How do you fill your cup? With money stolen from workers' wages. Self-care funded by environmental crimes. Maybe try pouring from a cup that isn't filled with blood money. Within hours, she had deleted the post, but screenshots had already spread across social media platforms. The hashtag #EmptyCupFullCrimes trended for 3 days. Her final attempt at maintaining her social media presence ended when someone created a detailed infographic showing how much her wardrobe cost compared to the annual salaries of Reed footwear workers. The numbers were devastating. Her handbag collection was worth more than 3 workers' combined yearly wages. Her jewelry collection exceeded the company's annual safety budget. She deleted her entire social media presence the next day. But the story that gave me the most satisfaction appeared in the Boston Business Journal's year-end Winners and Losers issue. Winner: Hale Manufacturing Division, which transformed a failing company into a model of worker-focused manufacturing while maintaining profitability and environmental compliance. Loser: the Reed family, whose systematic criminal activity was exposed when they publicly humiliated the wrong business executive at a wedding reception. The article included a detailed timeline. Savannah's insult at the wedding, my acquisition of Reed Footwear Works, the discovery of criminal activity, federal investigation, and the Reed family's complete social and financial destruction. But it also included information that the Reed family was just beginning to understand: the scope of their civil liability beyond their criminal charges. James Morrison had been methodically filing civil suits on behalf of every affected party. Workers seeking overtime pay that had been illegally withheld. Environmental groups demanding cleanup costs for contaminated soil and water. Vendors who had been defrauded through the kickback schemes. Insurance companies seeking to recover fraudulent claims. Each lawsuit was meticulously documented, professionally managed, and absolutely devastating to the Reed family's remaining assets. The Reed family's civil liability currently exceeds $3.2 million, the article noted. Their frozen assets, including their home, vehicles, and investment accounts have an estimated value of $1.8 million. Even if they liquidate everything they own, they will remain substantially in debt to the people they defrauded. That same week brought news that completed their financial destruction. Martin Reed's personal guarantees on business loans were being called by every lender simultaneously. When he had restructured Reed Footwear Works' debt 2 years earlier, desperate for cash to maintain the family's lifestyle while avoiding necessary business investments, he had personally guaranteed every loan. His home, his vehicles, his investment accounts, even his life insurance policies had been pledged as collateral. Now, with the company sold and his criminal activity exposed, every lender was demanding immediate payment. Martin Reed was personally liable for $2.7 million in business debt that he could never repay. The bankruptcy filing came 3 days before Christmas. A gift to federal prosecutors who could now argue that the Reed family had systematically hidden assets while defrauding workers and environmental agencies. But my favorite development was more personal. Ethan's discovery that his comfortable future had evaporated along with his in-laws' criminal enterprise. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice on the phone carried the strain of someone who had spent sleepless nights calculating the cost of his choices. "Savannah is 7 months pregnant. We're going to have a baby, and we don't know how we're going to support ourselves." "Congratulations on the pregnancy," I said with genuine warmth. "Babies are blessings, regardless of the circumstances of their conception." "What about the trust fund suspension? Can we discuss?" "Ethan, the trust suspension was based on your choice to support people who publicly humiliated your mother. That choice had consequences. Your child will not be responsible for your choices, but your child also won't benefit from trust funds that you forfeited through your behavior. But we have no money. Savannah can't work with the criminal charges pending. I'm working at a marketing firm for $45,000 a year. We can't afford. You can't afford the lifestyle you became accustomed to when you assumed my wealth would always be available to subsidize your choices." My voice carried the temperature of legal documents. "Most people raise children on household incomes far less than yours. It's difficult, but not impossible. You're going to let your grandchild grow up in poverty because you're angry at Savannah's family? I'm going to let my grandchild grow up learning that actions have consequences and that family wealth is earned through character and integrity, not inherited through genetic accident." I paused, considering my next words carefully. "If you want to discuss your child's future, we can have that conversation. But it will be a conversation about earning trust, not about restoring trust funds." "What do you mean?" "I mean that rebuilding family relationships requires acknowledging mistakes, demonstrating changed behavior, and proving over time that you understand the difference between loyalty and enabling." I looked out at the city lights, where somewhere my son was learning that comfort was not a birthright. Your child deserves better than parents who laugh at cruelty and enable criminal behavior. If you want to provide better, show me that you've learned to be better.
How?
Start by taking responsibility for your choices without blaming circumstances or other people. Continue by treating people with respect regardless of their social status or financial value to you. Demonstrate over time that you understand why your wife's behavior at the wedding was wrong and why your response was inadequate. And then we'll see if you've become the kind of person who should be entrusted with family wealth and family legacy. I smiled at my reflection in the window.
But Ethan?
That conversation is years away. Your child will be walking and talking before you've had enough time to prove that your character has improved. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and reviewed the latest reports from Hale Manufacturing Division. Production was up 34% over the previous year. Worker satisfaction surveys showed record high ratings. Environmental compliance was perfect. Customer satisfaction was at historic levels. The company was thriving under ethical management in ways it never had under criminal leadership. Martin Reed had been wrong about everything. Wrong that crime was profitable, wrong that workers were expendable, wrong that environmental regulations were optional, and catastrophically wrong about the woman he had laughed at in a wedding reception line. His laughter had cost him everything he owned and everything he would ever own. I raised my wine glass to my reflection in the window. To the Reed family, I said aloud, may they finally understand the price of underestimating people who fight back. The wine tasted like justice, and justice tasted like the understanding that some lessons are expensive enough to be permanent. 1 year to the day after Savannah Reed called me a disgusting family embarrassment in front of 300 wedding guests, I stood in the renovated factory floor of Hale Manufacturing Division, surrounded by workers, their families, and the machinery that hummed with the sound of honest prosperity. The transformation was complete and stunning. What had been a deteriorating facility with safety violations and environmental crimes had become a showcase of American manufacturing excellence. New equipment gleamed under energy-efficient lighting. Air filtration systems created a workspace that was clean, safe, and dignified. The smell was no longer of neglected leather and chemical shortcuts, but of quality materials and craftsmanship restored to its proper standards. Tonight was the first annual Excellence Awards ceremony, my answer to the Reed family's legacy of exploitation. Instead of enriching owners while impoverishing workers, we were celebrating the people whose skills and dedication created real value. I wore midnight blue silk and my grandmother's diamond necklace, jewelry earned through 3 generations of women who understood that true wealth comes from building things that matter. My silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and my pearls caught the light as I moved through the crowd, speaking personally with each worker and their family. Mrs. Patterson, I said to the woman who ran our leather cutting station, congratulations on your promotion to floor supervisor. The productivity improvements in your section have been extraordinary. She smiled with the confidence of someone whose expertise was finally recognized and compensated appropriately. Thank you, Ms. Hale. It feels good to work for someone who understands that quality takes time and skill. And proper equipment, I added, gesturing to the new hydraulic cutting tables that had replaced the 1987 machinery Martin Reed had refused to update. How are the new systems working? Like a dream. Precision is up 40%, waste is down 60%, and my back doesn't ache at the end of every shift. She laughed. My husband says I'm a different person when I come home now. That's what work should do, energize you, not exhaust you. Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. Workers who had been underpaid and undervalued for years were now thriving in an environment that treated them as skilled professionals rather than disposable expenses. The awards ceremony began at 7 o'clock sharp. I stood before the assembled crowd, workers, families, local officials, and media representatives, wearing the same pearls that had witnessed the Reed family's public humiliation exactly 1 year earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather tonight to celebrate excellence, not just in manufacturing, but in the human dignity that makes manufacturing meaningful. I gestured to the modernized equipment around us. 1 year ago, this facility was operating under leadership that saw workers as costs to be minimized and regulations as obstacles to be circumvented. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. These people remembered the Reed era with the clarity that comes from surviving something that should never have been endured. Today, this facility operates under leadership that sees workers as assets to be developed and regulations as standards to be exceeded. I smiled with genuine warmth. The difference is not just philosophical. It's profitable. Ethical treatment of workers and environmental responsibility are not charity. They are investments that pay returns in quality, productivity, and sustainability. The applause was sustained and genuine, not the polite clapping of corporate events, but the appreciation of people whose lives had been measurably improved by working for someone who understood their value. I presented awards for safety innovation, quality improvement, environmental excellence, and team leadership. Each recipient walked across a stage that had been built where Martin Reed's private office used to stand, the office where he had signed documents authorizing below-market wages while approving luxury expenses for his family. The symbolism was intentional and powerful. "Before we conclude this evening," I said, returning to the podium, "I want to address something that many of you have asked about over the past year." The room fell silent. Many people have suggested that the transformation of this company was motivated by personal grievances rather than business principles. They're partially correct. I paused, letting the admission settle. 1 year ago, at my son's wedding reception, I was publicly humiliated by people who thought my age and gender made me safe to mock. I could see phones rising throughout the crowd, workers and media alike recognizing that this was the moment the story would be completed. Those people were wrong about my character, wrong about my capabilities, and wrong about the consequences of underestimating someone who has spent 62 years learning how to fight. I smiled with the warmth of polished steel. But they were also wrong about business. They believed that cutting corners, exploiting workers, and ignoring environmental regulations were the paths to profitability. I gestured to the transformed facility around us. This company is now more profitable, more productive, and more sustainable than it has ever been. We've proven that treating people with dignity and operating within the law are not obstacles to success. They are the foundations of success. The applause was thunderous. So, yes, this transformation was motivated by personal experience. The personal experience of being underestimated by people who confused cruelty with strength, who mistook exploitation for efficiency, and who believed that laughing at others was a substitute for earning respect. I raised a crystal glass of champagne that had been waiting on the podium. To everyone who has ever been told they're too old, too weak, or too naive to fight back, you're not. To everyone who has ever been laughed at by people who thought they were safe from consequences, they're not. I met the eyes of workers throughout the crowd. And to everyone who has ever wondered whether justice is possible when money and power seem to protect the guilty, it is. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers that echoed off the high ceilings and modern equipment, sounds of celebration in a space that had once echoed with the sounds of exploitation and neglect. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, I walked through the facility one final time, touching the machinery that hummed with prosperity, breathing air that smelled of quality and safety, listening to the sound of success built on principles rather than compromised through shortcuts. My phone buzzed with a text message. I almost ignored it, but the sender caught my attention. Martin Reed. "Ms. Hale, I know you probably won't read this, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what we did wrong. The wedding, the business practices, all of it.
I'm sorry.
We lost everything, but maybe we deserve to lose it. I hope someday you can forgive us." I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Forgiveness was a luxury reserved for people who had learned their lessons before they needed federal prosecutors to teach them. The Reed family had spent a year portraying themselves as victims of my vindictiveness rather than criminals facing appropriate consequences. Their bankruptcy was finalized. Their criminal trials were scheduled for spring. Their social destruction was complete and permanent. Most importantly, their ability to hurt workers or destroy the environment had been permanently revoked. That was justice enough. I walked to my car, a black Mercedes that had been paid for with money earned through honest business practices rather than stolen from workers' wages, and drove through the city where the Reed family was learning to live with the consequences of choices they had made freely and repeatedly. At home in my penthouse, I poured myself a final glass of wine and stood at the windows that looked out over a city filled with lights powered by energy I had helped bring to market, in buildings where people wore jewelry I had designed, living lives that were possible because some people build value instead of stealing it. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window, a woman who had turned 62 years of experience into a weapon that was precise, legal, and utterly devastating when deployed against people who mistook kindness for weakness. To the disgusting family embarrassment, I said aloud, who taught a family of criminals the difference between wealth and power, between inheritance and consequences, and between laughing at others and being laughed at by history. I sipped wine that tasted like victory, victory that tasted like justice, and justice that tasted like the perfect balance between mercy and mathematics. Outside my windows, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in the darkness, the Reed family was learning that some bridges, once burned, create light that lasts forever. The lesson was complete. The teacher was satisfied. The students would remember their education for the rest of their lives. And that, I reflected, was exactly how justice should work. As we close Victoria's incredible story, I want to leave you with the most important lesson of all. You are never too old, never too anything to fight back against people who mistake your kindness for weakness. Victoria's story is extreme, but her principle is universal. Dignity is not negotiable, and consequences are not optional. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, has helped thousands of people like Victoria, and maybe like you. Understand that setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. That protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the natural consequences of their choices. The link is in the description below, and remember, we offer a 30-day money-back guarantee because we believe this message can change lives. Don't wait until you're facing your own wedding reception moment to start protecting your peace. Thank you for watching her true stories. If Victoria's journey resonated with you, please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share your own story in the comments. This community exists to support each other through life's most challenging moments. And remember what Victoria learned. Some people will mistake your elegance for weakness, your patience for permission, and your kindness for stupidity. By the time they realize their error, it's far too late to apologize. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, protect your peace and never apologize for being underestimated by people who should have known better.